Hurricanes are some of the most iconic weather events out there, with their signature ring of clouds surrounding a tiny, pinhole like eye, making for some of the most spectacular weather photos from space. At the same time, however, they can be, and are, extremely destructive to anything that is unlucky enough to be in their path, and in some cases, they can decimate regions hundreds of square miles in area. But what exactly causes hurricanes to form? Why are they so deadly? And how have they changed over time? This video is a continuation of a series where I look at various extreme weather events affecting the United States, and by extension, the world, and how they've gotten more pronounced in recent years. If you haven't checked out the first video in the series, I'd recommend watching that as well. And as always, I'd appreciate if you would like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Okay, so how does a hurricane form? Well, in order for a hurricane to form, a few ingredients need to come together. The main two factors are ocean water that is warm, generally above 80 degrees Fahrenheit or 27 degrees Celsius, and air that is sufficiently moist. The reason these two factors need to coexist is because warm air rises, and air that is moist is able to form clouds and eventually thunderstorms as it rises. As the warm air rises, it leaves an area of lower pressure underneath, which is violently filled as surrounding air rushes in, swirling around the center of low pressure. This process repeats over and over again as long as there is water sufficiently warm and the air isn't too dry. Since the thunderstorms swirl around the center of low pressure instead of through it, there is an area where there is no wind and usually significantly fewer clouds, which is the storm's iconic eye. Because conditions in the eye are so much calmer compared to outside, there have been instances in the past where people will head outside thinking the storm is over, only to be caught outside when the back half of the storm moves through. Finally, it is worth mentioning that once a hurricane moves over land, colder water, or dry air, it can no longer sustain this process and either falls apart or transitions into a post-tropical storm, or in other words, a storm that has characteristics closer to the mid-latitudes rather than the tropics. So, where do hurricanes happen? Well, since all that's needed is warm ocean water and humid air, they can form almost anywhere in the tropics. The main hotspots for hurricanes are in the northern Atlantic Ocean, the northeastern Pacific Ocean, the northwestern Pacific Ocean, where they're called typhoons, and the Indian Ocean, where they're called cyclones. Because of the way winds blow, hurricanes usually move east to west, so this makes the Caribbean, Mexico, the southern and eastern US, Hawaii, and anywhere on Asia's Pacific coast the regions most vulnerable to hurricanes, and anywhere in these areas are susceptible to the damaging effects I'll cover in a bit. On rare occasions, the right conditions for hurricanes can form in other parts of the world, such as the Mediterranean Sea or the eastern coast of South America, but these hurricanes usually don't grow as strong due to the less favorable conditions found there. One interesting thing to note is that each of these regions has their own naming list for storms, with the Atlantic and Eastern Pacific having lists that rotate every 6 years, with alternating boy-girl names from A to Z. And if there's ever a season with more than 26 tropical storms, they start using the Greek alphabet. However, not all hurricanes are created equal. There is a category system that is devised for these storms, and it all boils down to how fast the strongest winds are inside the storm. The absolute weakest of the bunch are tropical depressions, which have winds lower than 39 miles per hour or 62 kilometers per hour, and are basically disorganized thunderstorms that can drop a ton of rain, but not much else. Between 39 and 73 miles per hour, or 62 to 117 kilometers per hour, we have what is known as a tropical storm. And there are storms that are strong and organized enough to get their own name, but are otherwise glorified tropical depressions with no eyes to speak of. Anything above 74 miles per hour or 119 kilometers per hour is considered a hurricane. And these storms have winds that are strong enough to cause actual damage to infrastructure. These hurricanes are then ranked on a scale from 1 through 5, with Category 5 hurricanes packing winds of greater than 157 miles per hour or 252 kilometers per hour, which is about as fast as a Formula One race car. Winds this fast are seriously devastating, and all but the most stable foundations are probably going to be ripped apart. It is safe to say that Category 5 hurricanes are some of the most destructive natural phenomena in the world. But besides their NASCAR-style winds, what impacts do hurricanes have? Well, the main things that define a hurricane are wind, rain, and storm surge. Rain should be pretty self-explanatory. Hurricanes are basically giant thunderstorms that spin really, really fast. And anyone who's been under enough thunderstorms can testify to the fact that it can absolutely pour during one of those things. If a hurricane stalls over a large enough area, this torrential rainfall can cause some devastating flooding, as was the case in 2017 when Hurricane Harvey dropped rainfall totals measuring in feet or even a full meter over southeastern Texas, inundating the region with water. The other major destructive force that a hurricane possesses is storm surge. Since hurricanes are spinning, that inevitably means that when a hurricane approaches land, there will be a side of a hurricane where those Formula One winds are pushing towards the landmass. As it turns out, that wind is pushing a lot of water towards that landmass, and when the hurricane makes landfall, all of that water crashes onto the land, in some cases inundating the coast with over 20 feet or 6 meters of water. On the other side of the storm, the wind pushes water away from land, which is more harmless but does lead to some funny effects, just as the entirety of Tampa Bay being drained during Hurricanes Irma and Ian. Okay, so now that we've gotten all the general info out of the way, how have they changed over time? Well, just like heat domes in my previous video, climate change is having an enormous impact on the formation and intensity of hurricanes. If you remember, warm water is one of the main ingredients for a hurricane to form, and climate change is making the ocean warmer. This is important because it's not an on-off switch, where water above a certain temperature will allow for a hurricane to form, otherwise it won't. No, since while moderately warm waters allow for hurricanes to form, extremely warm waters are basically fuel to the hurricane's fire, and the sheer amount of energy radiated by these waters can allow for a hurricane to rapidly intensify. That is, have wind speeds increase by 35 miles per hour, 55 kilometers per hour, or more over the span of 24 hours. We are already seeing this play out in 2023, where official forecasts are calling for a record warm Atlantic Ocean to largely override the effects of developing El Nino and ultimately produce a more active hurricane season than average anyway. Additionally, as waters warm, this will allow for hurricanes to form more easily in places that are currently hostile, with the aforementioned Mediterranean basin being a possible area of concern in the future. So, what can you do to protect against a hurricane? Well, if you live far from the coast, nothing. It is near impossible for a hurricane to survive more than a few hundred miles over land, and oftentimes they fall apart almost immediately after landfall. If you live on or close to the ocean, however, it is best to have a plan ready for when a hurricane strikes. The best course of action is to evacuate to an area that will not be impacted by the hurricane well ahead of time. And in many places, authorities have gone as far as to make both sides of a freeway point the same direction in order to enable as many people to get out as possible. If evacuation isn't possible, however, it is best to hunker down, potentially for the long haul. Even after the worst of the storm has passed, things like flooding and wind damage can make it near impossible to leave your home or for authorities to provide assistance. Because of this, stocking up on food, water, and other supplies is necessary during a hurricane, and it is best to prepare for a potential power outage, which happens very frequently. Overall, hurricane preparedness is extremely important for living on almost any tropical coastline, and making sure you're ready for when one hits is extremely vital to ensuring you, well, weather the storm. And that's all I have to say about hurricanes. As always, I'd appreciate you like the video, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to stay tuned for future content. Thanks and have a great day.